Okay, now we'll see about SNAC and SLAC wrist. SLAC and SNAC wrist. So these SLAC and SNAC wrist, these both are complications. These are the complications that happens in the carpal bones if they are left untreated. If they are left untreated, this SLAC and SNAC wrist can happen. Okay, so to put it in the most simplest way, if a scapholunate ligament injury is left untreated, if it is left untreated, it will result in SLAC. Okay, the full form is scapholunate advanced collapse. Scapholunate advanced collapse. Okay, and if a scaphoid fracture is left untreated, it will result in a SNAC, that is scaphoid non-union advanced collapse. Okay, so these are the complications of an injury in the carpal bone if it is left untreated. Okay, so now let's see. Okay, so another important two things that you need to remember is the first carpal bone or the first joint in the hand that undergoes degenerative change. The first joint to undergo degenerative change is radioscaphoid joint. Okay, this is very important to remember. And another thing is both the SLAC and SNAC, both of these things eventually will end up in DC deformity, dorsal intercalated segmental instability. Both the SLAC and SNAC wrist will eventually result in a DC deformity. In DC, the lunate bone will tilt dorsally. You can see it on a lateral X-ray or a SAG CT. Okay, so the first joint to undergo degenerative change is a radioscaphoid joint. Okay, so now let's see what happens in a SLAC. What happens in a SLAC wrist? So in a SLAC wrist, there is scapholunate ligament injury first, and it is left untreated. Okay, so this is the ulna, then that is the radius. That is the scaphoid, that is the lunate, that is the capitate, and rest of the carpal bones. Okay. So here what happens is, so you can see there is a ligament injury between the scaphoid and the lunate. Scaphoid lunate disruption is there, ligament disruption is there, and the scapholunate gap is more than 3 mm. So the Terry Thomas sign, this is called. So this is so what happens is, if a ligament injury like this is left untreated, after a while what happens is there will be degenerative changes that develop. It can develop between the scaphoid and the radial styloid. Then as it progresses, it develops between the other bones also, between the capitate and the lunate and the other parts of the radius and the scaphoid. So these degenerative changes is what is known as SLAC wrist. So this is SLAC wrist, and it can also result in DC deformity. Okay. And in the case of a SNAC wrist, what happens is, in a SNAC wrist, there is fracture of the scaphoid. There is no ligament disruption, but there is fracture of the scaphoid. The lunate will be here only, in close proximity to the scaphoid, because there is no ligament disruption. But there is a fracture in the scaphoid, and because of the fracture, there is a non-union of the scaphoid bone, and this will also result in similar fashion of osteoarthritic changes in the carpal bones. So that is what you see in a SNAC wrist. That also will result in a DC deformity eventually. So let's see some examples. Yeah, so you can see the schematic diagram of what happens. So this is a SLAC wrist. Okay, so initially what happens is, see, this is the scaphoid, this is the lunate. See, this is the scaphoid, this is the lunate. Okay, so initially there is a ligament between here. So the ligament disruption will happen, and because of that, because of the ligament disruption, the scapholunate gap is more, and when it is left untreated, as it progresses, you can see the osteoarthritic changes developing between the scaphoid and the radial styloid. Then there is more osteoarthritic changes here, and again, as it progresses, more osteoarthritic changes is seen developing between the capitate and the lunate, and even finally it can even develop between the radioulnar joint. So this is what happens in a SLAC wrist. So we'll see one example. So you can see here what is happening here is all the findings you can see over here. See, this is the scapholunate ligament. The scaphoid is here, lunate is here, capitate is here, and the scaphoid and the lunate, there is a gap, and you can see the sclerosis, the osteoarthritic changes between the scaphoid and the radial styloid, and other osteoarthritic changes can also be seen by between the capitate and the lunate, and there are some degenerative changes like osteophytes and all can be seen. And so this is the SLAC wrist. So this is what happens in a SLAC wrist. Okay. And in a SAG, what you will see is eventually, this is the lunate bone in close proximity to the radius, the easiest bone to recognize. Okay. So what are we seeing here? This is the dorsal aspect, this is the volar aspect. You can see the lunate is tilted dorsally. Okay, this is the lunate and it has tilted dorsally. So this is a DC deformity. Okay. And now let's see what happens in a this is the next one. This is a SNAC wrist. Okay. Let's see what happens in a SNAC wrist. As I said before, in a SNAC wrist, first a scaphoid fracture will happen. So there's a scaphoid fracture in the waist region, and there is non-union of the scaphoid fracture. And when it is left untreated later on, you can see some degenerative changes developing between the distal scaphoid and the radial scaphoid fossa. And as it progresses, you can see the degenerative changes between the other carpal bones also developing. So this is what happens in a SNAC wrist. And one example of this is, you can see here, there is a fracture in the scaphoid bone in the wrist region, and the proximal fragment is sclerosed. So this is consistent with avascular necrosis. And you can see degenerative changes between the scaphoid and the radial scaphoid fossa here. And there is a reduced joint space between the other carpal bones. And there is a pseudocyst in the lunate and another pseudocyst in the distal radius, and multiple loose bodies and osteophytes can also be seen in the carpal bones. So this is what happens when a scaphoid fracture is left untreated. Also a negative ulnar variance is seen here. And on a SAG CT, what are we seeing here is, look at the lunate bone. This is the dorsal aspect, this is the volar aspect, and the lunate is tilted dorsally. So this is a DC deformity. This lunate is tilted dorsally because the capitate above it moves proximally. So when the capitate moves proximally, so this is the capitate bone that has moved into the lunate proximally. So the lunate is tilted dorsally. So that is how DC deformity forms in a SLAC and a SNAC wrist. Okay, so that is it.